Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Monday, November 11th, 2024. This is The Excerpt. Today, an early look at Trump's cabinet decisions, plus what does the next administration mean for immigrants in the U.S., and a new global meeting on climate change begins. President-elect Donald Trump has made some early decisions about his cabinet following his election win last week. Trump announced Susie Wiles as his chief of staff Thursday, making her the first woman to hold the position. He also said Saturday that neither former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley nor former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will have a role at the start of the new administration. Questions remain about the roles high-profile supporters like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the independent presidential candidate who endorsed him after dropping out of the race, and billionaire Elon Musk, who donated more than $118 million to his Trump-backing PAC, will play in the next administration. Trump has previously said he would give Musk a cost-cutting role in his administration while allowing anti-vaccine activist Kennedy to, quote, go wild on health, unquote. With a Republican Senate majority in place, Trump expects to have little resistance in confirming his cabinet picks. For a closer look at some of the potential nominees for Trump's cabinet, check out a link in today's show notes. What does a new Trump presidency mean for immigrants and their family members across the country? I spoke with USA Today national immigration reporter Lauren Viagran for more. Lauren, thank you for hopping on during this election week.
Yeah, thank you, Taylor.
So let's just start with the basics here at the top, Lauren. What do we know about Donald Trump's immigration plans now that he's been elected?
So Donald Trump has not released any detailed plan. We know what we've heard from him on the campaign trail all along, which is that he intends to launch a mass deportation of immigrants who are in the country illegally, and that he also plans to roll back some of the immigration benefits that allow hundreds of thousands of immigrants to stay here lawfully.
You know, so-called sanctuary jurisdictions are not expected to work within all of this Trump immigration framework necessarily. How might they factor in here, Lauren, and really how might they push back against this administration's plans?
So during the first Trump administration, he tried to do a lot of things vis-a-vis immigration enforcement and met really strong resistance from immigrant rights advocates, organizations like the ACLU or jurisdictions like California or New York. So-called sanctuary cities and sanctuary jurisdictions are likely going to buckle down and try to protect the folks who may be in the country without authorization. You know, you saw on Thursday, Governor Gavin Newsom of California calling a special legislative session to come up with a plan to fight the new Donald Trump administration, including on issues of immigration enforcement.
Lauren, you talk with a lot of immigrants and immigrant families. Just what are you hearing from them? What are their fears? What are their concerns? And really, how are they approaching going into next year after this election?
You know, the reality of his win and the resounding way in which he won has really unsettled many immigrant families. Listeners may not know or understand this, but a lot of times people live in households that are considered mixed status. What does that mean? It means that mom might be a US citizen, dad might be in the country without authorization, or with something like temporary protected status, which could disappear under the next Trump administration. The children might be a mix of US citizens and those who crossed earlier illegally with their parents. So that patchwork could make executing a mass deportation really complicated. The former director of US Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Tom Homan, has said that the administration doesn't plan to separate families, but could deport families together. But immigrant rights advocates say they don't see how that could be done without violating, civil and human rights. How do you deport a US citizen? So, we're going to be watching for how the Trump administration ultimately rolls out these plans. But it was clearly a defining issue in the campaign and one that many Americans care about.
All right, we'll see how all this shakes out. Lauren Viagran covers the border and immigration for USA Today. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, Taylor.
Demoralized Democrats are both soul-searching and blaming each other after President-elect Donald Trump's comprehensive election victory exposed erosion among working-class support for Democrats. Dems, who have long prided themselves as the party for the little guy, instead strengthened their emerging base of financially secure college graduates this election, while a growing number of blue-collar voters embraced Trump and Republicans. And the exodus of working-class voters from the Democratic Party included not just white voters, but helped Trump make gains with Latino and black men. The realignment shows a concerning political reality for Democrats, with blue-collar voters flocking away from their party over multiple election cycles. Democrats' refashioned base is becoming more upper-class, urban, suburban, and coastal. It gave Republicans their first popular vote victory in 20 years, and such a narrowed coalition does not bode well for Democrats in future elections. Meanwhile, Senator Bernie Sanders told NBC and CNN yesterday that while he thinks the Biden administration's policies have been pro-worker and favorable for unions, the Democratic Party failed to directly acknowledge the full extent of hardship for many voters in 2024. He also said that it's about what does the Democratic Party stand for. You can read more about some of these issues for Democrats with a link in today's show notes. A health department in Idaho has voted to halt its COVID-19 vaccination program, joining the growing number of regional governments pushing back against federal vaccination recommendations. These actions concern some public health experts who fear health departments elsewhere in the country may stop offering vaccines and other vital health services. Board members at Southwest District Health outside of Boise questioned the vaccine safety during their meeting last month and narrowly voted to stop providing the shot in the 6 counties they serve. Health departments in Texas, Florida, and Michigan that led vaccination campaigns in their communities at the height of the pandemic have also pushed back against the COVID-19 vaccine. Such moves come amid the possibility that vaccine conspiracy theorist Robert F. Kennedy Jr. could be given a health policy role in the next Trump administration that could also influence vaccine policy. World leaders are gathering this week to shape the planet's future climate. I caught up with USA Today national correspondent Elizabeth Weiss to discuss the UN climate change meeting, COP29. I appreciate you hopping on, Beth. Thanks for making the time.
Happy to be here.
So let's just start with the basics. What is COP29 and what are some of the main goals of this month's meetings?
The UN has such strange naming conventions. So this is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Conference of the Parties, and that means the parties who signed the treaties or the agreements. So we are one of the Conference of Parties. So this is the 29th meeting of the Conference of Parties.
What are some of the main goals of this month's meetings, Beth?
COPs happen every year, except they didn't happen one year during COVID. The point is, all the countries who back in the 2000s signed on to say, yeah, climate change is real and we actually need to deal with it, get together once a year to say, okay, where are we? And it's one of these insanely bureaucratic, slow moving entities where you think nothing at all is happening. And yet, actually, important things do happen. They're just couched in their incredible legal language. This year is going to be the Finance COP and the Finance Conference of Parties meeting. And the aim is to figure out how do wealthy countries, i.e., developed countries, help support monetarily the underdeveloped countries, the poorer countries, which are going to be most impacted by climate change, which are being impacted by climate change, and also helping them make the energy transition.
So, Beth, these meetings come at a pretty unique time, a week after the U.S. election, a week after Trump's win. What impact will the aftermath of all of that and a change in power back to Donald Trump have on COP29? And, Beth, really just the future of climate work globally?
Well, the world's not going to stop thinking about climate change. The United States won't stop thinking about climate change. What the United States does about climate change could change pretty drastically. So the US signed the Paris Accord back in 2015, which said, yes, we are going to set limits and we're going to lower the amount of carbon dioxide we put into the atmosphere, along with every other nation. I mean, I think the only nations that hadn't signed it were like Iran, Libya, and Yemen. And then President Trump pulled the US out of the Paris Agreement. But because of it, it takes a long time. You have to basically file papers saying we're going to leave this. It's kind of like getting divorced. You file papers, you have to wait a year before you can actually pull out. And so He pulled the US out, but 108 days later, after President Biden had been elected, the US re entered the Paris Agreement. Now, President Trump, who said very clearly on the campaign trail that he doesn't believe in the Paris Accord and wants us to leave and has called climate change a hoax, and has said he wants to withdraw from the Paris Accord, and not just the Paris Accord, but the underlying agreement that all the nations of the world, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which everybody signed on to in 1992 in Rio, and that was under President George H.W. Bush, a Republican. His campaign has said he wants to pull us out of that as well. What any of this means and what effects it will have, an excellent question.
Wow. So I am curious, Beth, before I let you go, just kind of for a progress report on the climate overall. I mean, how are we doing as a planet? Have we been meeting any of these goals we've set for ourselves over the last decade or so? And if not, what needs to happen?
We haven't. We've been trying to keep temperature from increasing more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. There's really strong scientific evidence out this year that the Earth probably crossed that threshold last year. The original Paris Accords were saying, in 2.0 would be really, really bad, and now we're kind of edging up on that. I mean, that said, and the kind of light that I try and think about is that renewable energy, specifically wind and really, really solar, has just gotten so gosh darn cheap that it kind of doesn't make sense to do any other energy types these days. I mean, China is just eating everybody's lunch when it comes to solar because they're building so much of it. And they built as much solar power this year as the US ever has. And so they're just increasing their ability to have this really cheap energy source. And they're probably going to meet their Paris Accord agreements by 2030, which the US is not currently on track to do. So, I mean, but that brings up all these issues of trade and do we want Chinese produced panels in the United States? But globally, it means that there's a whole lot of really cheap solar energy out there that can be built very cheaply. So that's a positive note.
All right. Positive note for us. Elizabeth Weiss is a national correspondent with USA Today. Thank you, Beth.
Happy to be here as always.
Today is Veterans Day, the annual federal holiday that celebrates and remembers all who have served in the military, both in wartime and peacetime. The day has been observed in one form or another since 1919, when then-President Woodrow Wilson commemorated the first anniversary of the World War I armistice. Thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio, and if you're on a smart speaker, just ask for The Excerpt. I'm Taylor Wilson, and I'll be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.